So hello everybody, I'm Elli Leadbeater and I want to, just in the last few minutes of today, give you a flavour of how we study ecology and zoology and field biology outside the lab when we go out into the field, into the real world. And I'm going to talk about a field course that I've just come back from yesterday actually, which was a UK-based field course. I'm really pleased that we are able to study ecology in the UK because, as we've all seen over the last 18 months or so, UK ecology can be absolutely fascinating and it's incredibly diverse. You just need to know where to look. Where we went for this particular field course is somewhere called Knepp Castle Estate in Sussex. Knepp Castle is really particularly famous in the UK because it is our flagship rewilding project. Now, what people often think of when I talk about rewilding is introducing very exotic top predators. So, for example, wolves, lynx, these are all famous kind of rewilding ambitions. But in fact, the way rewilding works at Knepp is a far more holistic approach. To give you some background, Knepp was, until about the year 2000, was a working farm or a farm estate in Sussex. And things were going extremely badly, as they have been doing for many farmers. And that's because ever since the Second World War, we have been trying to eke whatever we can out of some very, out of very difficult to farm areas of land. So we've overused pesticides, we've tried to grow in extremely unfertile soil, which requires a lot of fertilizers, and basically it is becoming harder and harder to get that soil to produce anything. So the owners of Knepp, who were on the verge of bankruptcy at this time, decided to literally just give up trying to manage this land and try to get anything out of this land. And they just let things grow. They let things grow for 20 years. Now, they didn't entirely stop managing it. They took an ecological approach, which was to introduce large herbivores. You can see here we've got longhorn cattle and pigs here as well. And the reason for that is because they create diversity in the landscape. So we end up with a patchwork of clearings, forests, overgrown scrub, and what's really become quite a beautiful place. So the number of sightings of species that are not typically known in that area of the UK has been overwhelming. Knepp has nightingales, it has nightjars, it has purple emperor butterflies, it has slow worms, it has storks. It is a pretty incredible place. I'm just going to let the owners of Knepp tell you about it in their own words so that you can get a flavour of what this place really looks like.
What we've done here is different to conservation principles elsewhere.
The idea behind this project is now becoming well known as rewilding. The idea is you allow these natural processes as far as possible to happen.
Instead of conserving with specific species in mind, where you're focusing on keeping a habitat, locking it down as it is, so that preserves the numbers of certain species. What we've done here is just taken our hands off the steering wheel and just stood back and let nature take over.
And of course, you then get wonderful things happening.
We've got nightingales, turtle doves.
Barbasdale bat, probably Europe's rarest mammal, is starting to fly over this site.
In one cow pat alone, a student found 26 different species of beetle.
In a single morning, we counted last year 87 male purple emperors, and that's exceptional for anywhere, really.
All 5 owl species here.
A much more hands-off approach actually does deliver you the conservation benefits that you may predict, but also conservation benefits that you wouldn't have dreamed of.
What we're learning here, I think, is a future for conservation in the UK.
Okay, so that gives you a flavour of what Knepp looks like and the kind of place that we go to do ecology fieldwork. Now, hang on, without playing you that again. Ecology is not a luxury science. You can see we spend our time there camping, and that's so that we can get all our surveying done. We're up at dawn, we go to bed late, we're up at dawn to hear the birds, and we're up late to listen to or survey the bats. And that's what I just want to give you a quick flavour of how we do it. So, bat surveying is a key skill for our ecologists to learn, and that's because bats, although they're not typically, then it wouldn't necessarily be the mammal that you might first think of when you asked about UK mammals. They are actually, we have a quarter of all our mammal species are bats. Worldwide, there are over 1,400 species of bat. These are incredibly widely distributed. And in the UK, they are particularly vulnerable, and that's because they're pretty amazing creatures. So they they produce one offspring per year. They're incredibly long-lived. They don't even, well, most species don't reproduce until they're about 4 or 5. And female bats, when they produce young, they produce a pup which is about a quarter of that bat's size, and she has to carry that around with her for a week. So they invest it costs a lot to raise a baby bat, basically. And that means that bats have become extremely vulnerable, especially when we develop the landscape. So keeping track of our rare species is a key skill that our students learn and that they need when they go out to their future careers. How do we survey bats? Well, I'm sure you guys know that bats hunt via echolocation. So they produce these really super high ultrasonic calls that bounce off moths and other insects that they're hunting for, and which the bats can use to effectively see the insects, although really they're seeing by listening. So the way that we analyse bat calls is we use bat detectors. What this is Vicky's showing you one of our listening devices. These are called audio moths. And what we do is we go out at night time, we put them in the trees, in the forests where we're interested in surveying the bats, and they listen for us. So they'll record all the sound that they hear we set them to record for 1 minute in every 10. So throughout this forest, there's a horde of tiny listening devices to pick up the bats. I want to show you the kind of thing that we find using these. So let's leave here for a minute and look at one of our bat calls. So these are calls that we recorded last week, and I'm going to open one of our examples. Hang on. Let's look at this one. Okay, so what we've got here are two figures. Let me just zoom out. Along the bottom we've got time. This is the beginning of the recording. This is the end of the recording. And up here we have, this is what's called an oscillogram. So this tells us how much noise is going on at any point. And you can see that in this recording there is hardly anything going on at all. So we've basically recorded a minute of silence here. And this is what typically happens in any recording, because remember, these things are just set to record for 1 minute in every 10, irrespective of what's going on. So a recording like this, we can see there's almost nothing happening. So on this bottom spectrum, this is a frequency range. So high sounds would be up here, low sounds would be here, and this between 0 and 20 kilohertz is what human beings can typically hear. So this is the audible region down here, and up here we've got the ultrasound. Now let's look through, see what we've got on our other recordings. So if we look here, we can see something much more interesting popping up. So remember, this is the audible spectrum down here below 20, but these calls are very, very high. So these are without doubt bat calls. Let's zoom in on them and have a look at what they look like. Okay, so you can see they are very, very fast repeats of tiny chirps in the air. Let's zoom in a bit more. And these ones have a very kind of classic what's called a hockey stick shape. Okay, so I'll play you what they sound like. So this is a very, very slowed down version of a bat calling. So this is almost 1 second along here. You can hear that recording took much longer than 1 second. Basically all these chirps are slowed down so that we can hear them, like slowing down an old style tape. You know, when you slow it down it gets deeper. So that's exactly what's happening here. We're trying to make it deeper so that we can hear it, and in doing so we have to slow it down. So what kind of bat is this? Well, a key feature in trying to work out what bat we're looking at, trying to identify species and see if it's a rare species, is the peak frequency. The peak frequency is the point at which the chirp is loudest. How high is it at that point? And that's actually the brightest point on the spectrum here. We're asking what frequency is that? And we luckily I don't have to look at this and kind of guess what frequency it's at. I can get the software to tell me. So I'm just going to highlight this bit. And we can see this tells us a huge amount of information about that particular call. But the key fact that I'm looking for here is it's telling me that the peak frequency is 56 kilohertz. Now from that fact alone, in combination with the fact that their call looks like a hockey stick, I know that this is a soprano pipistrelle, because only soprano pipistrelles produce calls with a peak frequency of about 55 kilohertz. So there we go, we've identified what species of bat that was circling above us. And you can see if we go through the files a little bit more, on other recordings we've got different bats. So here the peak frequency, I'm not going to look at it now, but it's certainly lower than 55. Okay, so we've got a huge range of bats that we found at NEP. Just to give you an idea of what some of them look like. Just to have a couple of examples. So here, this is a serotine bat that we recorded. Remember the peak frequency of the pipistrelle, the soprano pipistrelle was 55. If I look at the peak frequency for these calls, it's much lower. We're at 33 here. These are lower sounding calls. Have a quick listen to them. Again, hugely slowed down, but this tells us that this is a serotine bat. And at NEP last week we found some incredibly rare species, including the barbastelle bat, which is one of the rarest species in the UK. So that was pretty exciting for us. So that's given you an idea of how we look at bat calls. Bats aren't the only thing we look at NEP. We do some other really cool stuff. So for example, it's some of our students doing invertebrate surveys. They're looking particularly at the monarch butterflies, but other things that we find. We do moth trapping, find beautiful, crazy moths there, hawk moths, etc. This is a glowworm that we found last week on one of our surveys, and a great crested newt. So we learn about how to basically collect DNA from ponds and attempt to identify whether the great crested newt is present there. This is one of our most protected species in the UK. We also do things like mist netting of birds to track bird populations. So mist netting is, well, it looks unpleasant here, but it's actually very, very quick and a very low stress way to monitor bird populations. So you can see this is one of the finches that we caught. These are birds. This is a student releasing one of the birds back to the wild once the bird's been surveyed. There we go. Okay, and we also do reptile surveying. We find slow worms, we find grass snakes, we find adders, and finally we survey the mammals that are there. So NEP has a huge variety of large mammals, particularly longhorn cattle and the Tamworth pigs. With the deer, we had students doing deer projects looking at which landscapes the deer tend to aggregate in. Small mammal trapping. This poor little thing, it looks like it's being suffocated in a bag. I promise you it's not. We capture them very briefly in humane traps, and so that we can monitor the population size. This is a field vole. And the bats I've already told you about. So that's a summary of how ecologists go into the field, learn the skills that they need for future careers, whether that's in research or whether that's being a consultant ecologist, whether that's being a government ecologist, any of these careers which need you to be able to identify and understand animal population trends.